Hello, coffee people. My name is Irina Sharipova, and I'm host of the podcast Coffee Business in the Middle East. I'm speaking with the coffee professionals from the world. And I just finished the conversation with Tim Heinze. We spoke about the Yemeni coffee production and what's happening with the processing and what is the difference between some type of the processing and how to deal with the new technologies and new types of the fermentations. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, Tim. Welcome to the podcast Coffee Business in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to speak about you because you're such a figure in the coffee industry. You did a lot of job regarding the coffee development, and of course, I want to start with your current job. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, right now I'm working with a company here based in Dubai, Copperwood. They're working with a group of coffee producers in Yemen. So I'm helping to support with quality control, supply chain development, looking at kind of how we continue to improve quality, and then also seeing that quality through the supply chain and through to the end roaster. And so it's been a fun project. Been working with them for about 6 months now.
Wow, that's very fascinating because, Yemeni coffee is famous here in this region, but not everyone knows what's really happening because there are lots of challenges to get this coffee. So what should consumers know about Yemeni coffee right now? Like, what is the situation and what is the real taste of it?
Yeah, I think that there's, obviously Yemen has a long history with coffee, right? I mean, there's lots of some really fascinating stories, and I think that there's people have experience having tasted certain coffees from Yemen and understanding some of the flavor profiles and all of that, and some of the uniqueness that you have with Yemen. I think what's really interesting and what I see as kind of path forward is that the supply chain there, you have a lot of very isolated producers, a lot of smallholders that are growing, have a couple hundred trees or small plots of land. You see the famous pictures drying cherry on top of their roofs, and it's a very unique in terms of even the landscape and the agriculture and the way of farming that they have. I mean, you have an area that has an extreme restriction of access to water, and so whether it's processing methods, whether it's how they care for their trees, how they terrace their lands, there's a lot of uniqueness there. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do at Copperwood is provide clarity into some of the traceability. I think what oftentimes happens a lot of times with Yemeni coffee is that it kind of gets consolidated around certain larger market areas and cities. And so some of the uniqueness that you might find in some of the regions gets lost at times because of that blending that goes on. And I get it from a commercial perspective, it makes total sense, right? But as we look to try to isolate and provide traceability back to certain farmers, we're really beginning to experience some of the uniqueness of the flavor profiles that we see across the different regions of Yemen. And you have, obviously, with some of the challenges that are happening there within the country, you have difficulties of accessing and getting the coffees out. And so our team that we're working with, we have a wonderful team on the ground that are overseeing processing and overseeing traceability and collecting samples and tracking lots. We've set up a processing center in Sana'a to do a lot of the drying and other things there. And so they're doing an incredible job on securing and maintaining that supply chain. And then other team members are based here in Dubai, and the founders of the company are based here in Dubai and have a long family history with Yemen and a deep passion for the people there. And so beginning to see those coffees come out of that region and to the rest of the world has been really exciting. And there's been others that have done that and really pioneered the way for, I think, Yemen coffee. And I think there's only great opportunity. And I'm really excited about some of the uniqueness of coffees coming from that area in the future.
Well, so speaking of the difficulties, do you travel to Yemen?
I have not been able to go.
You haven't?
So when I started on the project, I met the guys in April. We met Copperwood and the team, and we were kind of discussing, okay, let's figure out a way to get there. And I was really excited. I would love to go and visit. As a U.S. citizen, there's some challenges that come with that. But I was really excited, and then with some of the recent challenges that have been happening in the country, those plans were changed. There was some impact to the local airport, several logistical things that just didn't allow that to move forward. But in the meantime, we got connected with a wonderful local team, Arzak and her team there with Mocha Valley in country, that we've been able to partner with and form a deep connection and partnership with. And since they're there on the ground, as much as I would love to go, we'll have to wait a little bit until things open up a little bit, because I wouldn't want to create unnecessary challenges by going. And so I hope one day I get to go and see, and I would love to, but unfortunately I haven't been able to go yet.
Oh, I wish you to visit. Yeah, of course, because this country has a complex history, like in general, and speaking of the coffee, of course. But how you talk about the quality control? How do you do that? Like you get samples directly? Like what is the procedure?
Yeah, so right now, because we've set up a processing center in Sana'a, we are buying fresh cherry from local producers and moving that to Sana'a and then doing processing there. So we've initiated the process right now in Western Haraz of visiting farms, being able to register and understand how many trees the producers are growing. We've geotagged locations, and so with those kind of lotting, we have the ability to track which cherries are coming from which farmers, and then putting QR codes on bags and tracing that all the way to Sana'a, to our processing center. And then as we dry those coffees and process those coffees, our team samples and make sure that everything is coming out consistently, and then is able to do blending there with consistent lots, and being able, again, blending certain farms together in certain areas. And so it's been a lot of work putting in all of those systems in place, but it's been really exciting to see. And we're looking to begin branching out to other regions as well, that hopefully this year will be coming online as well, that we're really excited about.
I'm very excited about Yemeni coffee, but the challenge always is the price and how to explain the correlation. Because me as a coffee expert, I don't want to talk about, oh, yes, it's Yemen, it's expensive. Oh, it's Yemen, oh, yes, it's going to be expensive because of the politics, because of the logistics. Is it the way, or how we should, as experts in the East industry, explain about Yemeni coffee regarding the price, regarding the quality, and differentiate the quality? Because I believe that not all of the Yemeni coffee has the highest standards.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you definitely have a variation of quality, and as an agricultural product, not every seed is going to come out perfect, and so you have a wide variety of different quality levels. But it's a total fair question, and I get it. If you look at other countries and other areas of the world, the infrastructure that's been put in place to process and to manage large volumes of coffee is different than what you have in Yemen. And so while I can understand comparing it to other countries, I think we also have to understand that it's unique, and that the total volume of production is significantly lower than in what you find in other countries around the world. The infrastructure is not necessarily in place, not just from a roads and access perspective, but even just washing stations or processing centers or drying centers. All of that is something that is, you have isolated producers that are having to travel long distances, managing smaller farms. There's additional costs that go into all of that, and that's part of what contributes to the higher cost. You think of other parts of the world, other producing countries that have large smallholder networks, but within those networks you have cooperatives, you have organized systems that try to attempt to minimize some of the cost of production. And it's not that you don't have that in Yemen because you couldn't. You don't see that structure as robust and as in depth as what you see in other countries.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there's some work to be done with that, and trying to keep, maintain some of the costs and keep some of the costs down. But the volume isn't quite there, and because of that, you have some of the rarity that I think also is an appeal that drives cost or drives prices as well. But I also think that you have some, globally speaking, some exceptional quality coffees. Of course, not everything is, and no country would claim that all of their coffee is, right? But you do have some exceptional qualities that I think, and as you mentioned, even in this region, I think personal connection with that region and that area and the country and the people and the coffee, I think allows for a higher ceiling on value and on price. And I get it. Yemeni coffee does tend to be quite expensive, but I think it's definitely linked to cost of production because you are dealing with isolated producers. You don't have the systems in place that you have in other countries, but also I think it is the rarity of the coffee and of the product, the challenges logistically getting it out of the country and so forth. So we'll see how that continues to grow and change as the industry grows. But I hope that we can continue, not to get too much into a discussion on pricing, but I also acknowledge that a lot of our expectations on pricing are set by global coffee prices, commodity prices, and other things that are not reflective of how coffee is produced in every country around the world. How coffee is produced in one country is not the same as the cost of production and the cost of living and all of that you have in other areas. So while I respect and acknowledge the comparisons that we can bring, I think we also have to acknowledge the uniqueness of each country in their coffee production. So anyways, but I think it's a great conversation. It's a great question to have. And as we learn more, we get to discover more.
Yeah, because to me, as I'm teaching about coffee, I want to really help people to understand the diversity of coffee origins. That price not always matter. Doesn't match the quality. But yeah, speaking of the uniqueness of Yemen, that's true. The low yield. But is it about low yield, or Yemen has the capacity to grow more?
I think there is opportunity to grow more. Absolutely. I mean, one of the projects that Copperwood is a part of is there's a nonprofit organization based out of Switzerland called Y30 that we've partnered with, that their mission is to provide trees and to open nurseries to allow and provide opportunities for more producers to grow coffee. And so as Copperwood as a company, our commitment is every 2 kilos sold, we fund a new tree for a producer in different regions. And that's through the Y30 network of the work that they're doing. And so I do think that there's opportunity to expand production. It's just whether or not it's the right choice for producers and what they want to do, and whether they want to pursue that as an agricultural product or pursue something else. But yes, I do see that there is opportunity to expand production in the country.
Yeah, I believe there are lots of challenges in the Yemeni coffee production, such as logistics. Yeah, that's a good explanation of the cost of production. But what are the positive sides of the coffee production of Yemeni? Is it only related to specific terroir and we feel this Yemeni flavor profile? Or what is this uniqueness about?
Yeah, I mean, yes. If we look at the early expansion of coffee, we see that there is some uniqueness that we find in the varieties. Obviously, it is a very unique terroir that has, low moisture, low rainfall, but still is able to grow coffee, still manage that. You have, because of the lack of access to water, you do have pretty much predominant natural processed coffees across the country. So that has created some awareness or some expectation of flavor profiles and of qualities that does have some uniqueness. I think you also see that there are some innovative producers that are trying to do some other things, that are trying to, whether it's in-fruit fermentations or even maybe trying to venture into honey processed coffees or other types of processing methods. I think there's still a very strong aversion to wash processed coffees, which I think is fair because of the lack of access to water across the country. I think it would be challenging for me to encourage people to produce washed coffees in a country that already is having challenges with access to water. But something like a honey processed coffee that gives a unique flavor profile or a unique distinctiveness, I mean, you're aware I do a lot of teaching and educating with processing, and it's something that's very dear to my heart. And the opportunity I think that producers have to differentiate the flavor profiles that they're producing gives them an opportunity to access different markets and access different customers that might prefer different flavor profiles or want different flavor profiles. And so, I think that there is an opportunity to expand outside of maybe what some of the traditional flavor profiles are. And not that that's bad, not that there's anything wrong with those, but to expand outside of that and to really explore what other possibilities there are out there.
I see. So just for my understanding of the Yemeni production, it's is it similar to Ethiopian heirloom? It's like wildly grown coffee, or it's possible to track the varieties? Because I heard only about Yemenia.
Yeah.
Correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong.
Yeah, so there's been some research around like understanding the genetic history of Yemen coffee. Um, I I'll acknowledge I'm not a botanist, I'm not a geneticist, so all my information is just what I've kind of read and seen from research papers and other things. I saw and have been reading up on the introduction of Yemenia as a different and unique and distinct genetic group of Arabica. So you have kind of your Typica line and your Bourbon line, and then you have those varieties that moved from region of Ethiopia into Yemen initially, and then really thrived and grew within that region. So I think if we look at the history of that, we see genetically that there is a variation that exists there, a heirloom or whatever, landrace, whatever term you want to use, that provides some uniqueness to the characteristics that we find in the cup. And I know that a lot of the names that are used locally tend to just be kind of local names, as things go, right? I mean, there's not always this clarity on understanding what exactly, from a genetic point of view, is growing. It's just what we've grown, and so there's not always that depth of understanding. But I do see over the last several years, there's been more and more research trying to isolate and understand the genetic history and what is there. And I think we're seeing a complexity and a variation to the genetic makeup of those coffees different than what we see in the Typica line and Bourbon line of Arabica coffee. What extent of that and how diverse that is, I think, is something that we'll continue to learn more and more about. But I definitely believe that the genetics provide a uniqueness and a unique to the characteristics that we find there. Particularly tying back to the history of coffee production in the region. And so I'm excited I think we'll learn more in the coming years for sure.
Yeah, I'm also excited because, this coffee deeply in the mindset of Arabs here, because we work in the Middle East, and I think people would love to have this coffee more, but we don't have access to this that much. Who is the main buyer? Like which country importing coffee?
That's a great question. I've done a lot of looking at, who's buying the specialty coffee and who's bringing some of that out. But to be honest with you, I don't know which country would be identified as the largest importer of Yemeni coffee. It's a great question.
Yeah.
I know that, obviously with the proximity to access, even though logistical challenges out of Yemen, I think just the proximity, we see this region as being a major buyer of that. But, I think you obviously have to look at that from a commercial level versus a specialty level. We can see different roasters across the world that introduce Yemen lots and have different filter offerings or single origin offerings or special offerings of Yemen coffee from certain lots and certain batches. But it's a great question. It's something that I definitely I want to investigate a little bit more. But my understanding is that due to just kind of the proximity of of Yemen to this region, that you would see a lot of coffee, and I believe that you see a significant amount of maybe lower grade or mid grade also consumed locally, and then also making its way out of the country into other markets in this region.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. But I hope it's going to be more and more coffee from Yemen.
Yeah.
And that it will be not affordable. Yes, okay, I have to accept this. But at least to see the option in the market.
Yeah.
But to me, sometimes what I feel, there are lots of producers, they're trying to, not traders, I would say, they're trying to sell Yemeni coffee. And I feel it's kind of either low grade or old crop, or something happened with the roasting, because I believe also to roast Yemeni coffee, it's challenging.
It is.
Because that's what I heard from the roasters.
Yeah.
It's very small, the coffee bean size is like close to mocha, right?
Yeah.
And it's challenging. And I think to get what we want from specialty coffee, like the clarity, the
Yeah.
complexity of the coffee, the acidity, it's kind of complicated. Yeah, so
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the density is super high.
Yeah.
So I also, this is something I've learned as well, is that, when we think about resting coffee after roasting, for whatever reason, and I haven't dug into the extent of the science behind all of it, but just experientially, allowing Yemeni coffee to rest a little bit longer actually improves or helps. Typically when we're cupping, we're roasting, and then maybe the next day, or a 12-hour or 24-hour or whatever we're doing, kind of resting before we start cupping. But I've been learning and experiencing and finding out that actually waiting 5 days or 6 days or 7 days actually gives you a better understanding of what that quality looks like. So I think because related to some of the density, related to some of the chemical structure of that actual coffee, allowing a little bit longer rest times tends to also give you a clear picture of what that quality is. I think your point about, I do believe that when we talk about coffees presenting age notes quicker, there's lots of things that can impact that, obviously, but I think one of the things I find consistently has to do with drying. And when you're drying coffees at really high temperatures, those coffees tend to age quicker, just as general kind of rule of thumb. You're compromising the cellular structure of that seed, and so the oxidation properties happen quicker, and those aged notes present sooner. So I think some of that is also linked to a educational awareness that's needed about drying, and because so much of the coffee in the country is harvested and dried by individual families, individual farmers, you have some inconsistency that can come up of the quality of what that's coming out as. And so, yeah, I think that there's definitely some opportunities there for improvement and some opportunities for growth, but all of those, again, are linked to challenges with just how the industry is arranged there, and the kind of systems that are in place there.
Yeah, I see. And speaking of the processing, mainly it's a naturally processed
Correct.
coffee, but you started to implement some special techniques, like maybe anaerobic fermentation. I think it's happening because Yemeni coffee tends to be very like liquorous, a little bit winey, fermenty.
Spicy. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to change this profile, like
It's
to
not that
create diversity?
No, I mean it's not. Well, I mean it's not that we're wanting to change it because we think it's bad. I think there's a beauty to the uniqueness and to the tradition of what it is. I think the opportunity is just introducing something in addition, other types of flavor profiles, to explore what other opportunities are out there. We're not the first to begin doing in-fruit fermentation on coffees in Yemen. There's other companies, other cooperatives, other producers that are doing that and seeing some really interesting results from that. I mean, I was here, I was there at the DMCC live auction yesterday, and there are some lots that were carbonic maceration and anaerobic and all these other things. So you see some innovation that's going on in the processing space and other places as well, which is exciting. And so it's not necessarily wanting to introduce those because the tradition or what's historically been there is bad or wrong, but providing a different opportunity for not only producers to craft a different product that they can sell to roasters, but even giving roasters an opportunity to introduce a new experience or a different experience for people to Yemeni coffee.
Which process do you prefer for Yemeni?
Yeah,
or in general, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, some of it I think depends on how you're using it, right? So if we're doing a filter coffee versus an espresso versus some other kind of product, it's a funny question because people ask me all the time, like, what's your favorite process? What's your favorite coffee? What do you love to drink?
Yes.
And I'm like, I can't really narrow it down. I love the opportunity we have to taste different flavors, different profiles. And so there's some beauty to kind of the classic natural processed coffee we find in Yemen and particularly in Haraz and that region. And then there's also some I think beauty to some of the anaerobic or, extended fermentation kind of coffees that give us an opportunity to explore what some of the native microorganisms in that region, how they contribute to that flavor development and that flavor profile. So recently our team there in Sana'a, they purchased a little horizontal drum pulper to start doing some honey processed coffees as well. So we're going to see what that kind of flavor profile is like, and we'll see the uniqueness that provides.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of, I want to ask you about the co-fermentation infused. It's not. Yeah, I just need to understand how to deal with that. Honestly, how to just deal with this, because I have my personal preferences.
Sure.
And we have the preferences of the markets, and we see that by default already here in the world of coffee, you go to the booth and they give you like coffee in like without any question, like this is co-fermented. Like I don't want this. Can I try something else? Like what's happening? It's because we start to promote this, like the industry started to promote it because they feel that there is a demand, or it's because of it's easier for the customers to understand the co-fermented and infused coffee in order to describe to tell descriptors about this coffee. Like what's happening?
What is happening? That's the $1 million question, right? That's a great question. And there's many different ways that I could go talking about this. Your question about like why or what's leading to that, it's a big question. I'm trying to think of what's the best way to go about discussing it, because at the very core of my feelings about this is that I love in coffee when we elevate the role of the producer and processor. I think it's amazing that we have lots of challenges in coffee right now and never want to shy away from that at all. But I think we live in a time in coffee where we see more and more acknowledgement toward what the producer and processor is doing. And in previous periods of history, the role of the processor was, hey, look, just don't mess it up. Like, don't mess it up. Like, whatever you do, just don't mess it up. And now we've shifted that to the ability that a processor has to craft a flavor profile, whether that's through growing different genetics or varieties, whether that's through using different inoculations or processing methods or fermentation techniques. Personally, I love it because I think it acknowledges the role that the processor has to really craft a unique experience. I started in coffee through the farm. I drank coffee before, and to be honest, I did have a job as a barista for a few months, but honestly, I could have been a barista or I could have, flipped burgers at McDonald's. Like, it was just a paycheck, right? So, but really when I fell in love with coffee, it was through the farm. And so I never want to, disavow or downgrade the role that a roaster and barista plays. I understand that that's a crucial part of our supply chain. But to me, I always go back to the producer. And so when I think about the role of fermentation, the role of this processing, for me, I think if you as a processor producer have an opportunity to create value, to increase value to what you're producing by utilizing these techniques, why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you pursue that? And at the same time, we see in the specialty industry the drive from the roaster side of having something different, this kind of pursuit of differentiation, right? As a roaster, I want something different than the roaster down the road.
Yeah.
Like, I want something unique. I want a unique experience for the consumers. At the same time, you have a growing consuming culture that has different preferences. You have an Asian culture that their cuisine and their preference for flavor styles are different than maybe a European or a North American or a South American culture. So you have a lot of different growing consuming cultures that are also shaping those decisions. So as a rule of thumb, for me personally, I love innovation and creativity at the farm, at the processing level. I love it. Now, I acknowledge that the line between transparency and that pursuit needs some continued discussion. And I have to be honest here as well, because I feel like from the consuming side of the industry, there's a demand for a deluge of information, a massive amount of I mean, everything, including the dog's name, right? Like, we want and it's like this picture of like this waterfall of information coming. And then, but is that reciprocated back to the farmer in terms of the information, whether it's related to pricing, whether it's related to roast profiles, whether it's related to consumers and what their preferences are? I feel like the communication, the information stream is massively a one-way stream in the coffee industry. And we need to create more of a circular process of communicating information back to the producer. So if we're gonna have discussions on transparency and, hey, I wanna know what you did to this coffee and fine, but let's make that a two-way street. Let's make sure that we're exchanging information both ways, from traders to producers and from roasters to producers, and ensuring that information is communicated both ways. So while I acknowledge that there is some, I think, skepticism that exists right now around, okay, I'm getting this flavor profile, you're telling me this isn't infused, or this isn't co-fermented, or this isn't, well, how are you doing this? Well, I think because maybe the position of the conversation has been in a very defensive, aggressive almost kind of position. I don't know, as a processor, I might not be very forthcoming and willing to share information if it's going to be received with that kind of position. So I think we need to just kind of maybe come back to the table together as an industry and have a little bit more open dialogue about how we're going to maybe define or categorize or whatever it might be, so that there's not this opposition to, well, this is pure coffee, this is good coffee, and this is somehow some lower devaluing of it because it's impure coffee or something. So I would say that the pursuit of those processing methods and those innovations, while I think you had a convergence of roasters wanting something different, wanting something unique, consumers and their changing flavor profiles, but also the pursuit of the producer processor to innovate, to create different products, to create different, create value in whether they're trying to increase the value of maybe some of the coffees that they have that, whether it's genetically or whatever, are at a little bit of a disadvantage in the market. And so trying to create more value from that. So I don't think it's one single thing that really drove that. I think it's a convergence of many things. But me personally, I'm excited about it and I love it. And I think it's a great, again, we have significant challenges in our industry right now. But I think we live in a time in coffee where we're able to experience uniqueness in flavor profiles like we've never experienced before. And to me, I think that is exciting because it gives the producer opportunities to capture that market and that value.
Yeah, I totally agree about the diversity of the market, that we like creating new products. So my point is, I don't prefer when it's overpriced.
Okay.
Because I heard sometimes producers, they use low-graded raw material and they infuse it with something artificial or not artificial, I don't know exactly, and they overpriced it. Another side, from the perspective of the teaching, I work with, let's say, the normal customers who are just coffee drinkers in the coffee shop, and they start drinking coffee. And they ask me, okay, I want to describe the coffee. I feel this coffee is not good, it's just washed, but this also written washed, but it has citric notes. It all the temperature, hot, warm, cold, always citric, and there is citrus, and there is always cinnamon. How? Because it's kind of hard for me because I'm controversing myself as well. Like, I need to provide a full lecture about this. I'm not talking about it's bad or good, because it's the way I teach. I always tell to my students, we need to appreciate all the kinds of coffee. Robusta, commercial grade, 17 screen size.
Sure.
Doesn't matter, because every coffee has its own clientele. But how to deal with what's happening in the coffee shops right now or in the roasteries? If a person just finished my course, let's say Introduction to Coffee, he goes to a coffee shop and there's washed coffee, which is just pure washed coffee, and there is another washed coffee which is like extremely infused. Like, I need to provide more information that, oh, okay, guys, nowadays you can notice, yes, it's written washed, but sometimes they add something artificial. Like, how would you tell to the customers, to the students, beginners, how to deal with that?
Yeah. How
This
much
is my
how much
concern.
time do we have for this podcast? Because this could be a really long. No, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. I think that there's so a couple different things. One, I totally hear what you're saying. You know, you have producers that are taking whether it's lower grades or maybe it's, you know, whatever it is, coffees, and trying to, again, aggregate or create more value in that coffee, because historically that coffee has just gone into the commodity market, or there's been a limit to the opportunities for or the markets for that coffee. So they're trying to create different values to provide that. So I acknowledge that that's definitely something that's happening. Whether or not those coffees should or shouldn't be priced at certain levels, I don't feel qualified to really make that discussion. Ultimately, it's the market that decides that. You know, nobody's given me the authority to you know, price global coffees. It'd be kind of cool. That might be a fun job for a day to kind of be able to set those values, but that's not my role. It's definitely the market's role to kind of understand and to translate that. And I understand it from. For every conversation, I always try to look at it at both sides, right? If you have a producer who is using a traditional wash processing method, and they're selling their coffees into a market, and they're having to kind of compete with something that's been infused or something that's been utilized some kind of alternative processing method to drive those flavors, I get it. They might say, what you know, why is my coffee, our coffees are different, you know, what the method that I'm using and the method that they're using are different. So why are they being put on the same level? I get it. I understand that. I don't know that I have a clear answer on how we should value those coffees. And I don't believe that, I think that there needs to be some further conversations around what we call infused, what we call co-fermented, what we call inoculated, these terms that we have. But I would also say that I think we've lived under this myth or this assumption that over the last 15 or 20 years, the terms washed and natural and honey have all been unified or have all been clear, because that's not true, right? I mean, if you think about a Guatemalan, I think that's what the country you mentioned, so we'll just stick, or maybe I mentioned, so we'll just stick with Guatemala. You know, if you think about a washed Guatemalan coffee, the standardization of what that meant in Guatemala was significantly more widespread than what it is now. The hours of fermentation, the processing steps that went through, and historically those traditional processing methods were many times introduced from outside, whether it's multinationals that are setting up washing stations, whether it's even goes back to the history of coffee production in those countries. But there was more standardization around the flavor profiles because there was more widespread standardization of how coffees were processed. I think within the last 15 years, you could go into one roastery and get a washed coffee from Guatemala, and then another roastery and it'd be a washed coffee, and those tasted very differently, even within the same. And that's before we even got to infused and co-fermented and yada, 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 right? So I would say that I think some of that conversation assumes that prior to this, we had greater standardization. And I would disagree a little bit with that position, because I think we've already seen the diversification of those flavor profiles, because again, processors really took it on themselves to say, well, why am I doing it this way? Why can't we do it a different way? And again, I love that. So I acknowledge that from both sides of that argument, that there might be some sense of unfair competition. Like, why am I having to compete with that? Because it's not the way I do it. It's not this. I honestly believe that, I think, in my opinion, that the market will figure it out. I think the consumer, as the consumer continues to be educated and exposed to different coffees and different experiences, I think that there will be people that enjoy that infused, co-fermented, extended fermentation, all of that categorization of coffees, they'll continue to enjoy that. And some producers will start doing those and providing access into that market. And I think you'll have other people that, as they experience that, maybe they move away from that and they see, and it opens their eyes to what coffee can be, and they explore and they learn and they grow and they find other coffees that they enjoy. So while I acknowledge what exists right now, I like to think that as those consuming markets and cultures grow and change and advance, I think the market will figure it out. I think the market will, if everybody starts doing infused coffees, obviously that changed the value of those coffees, right? Because if you have an oversupply, just simple law of supply and demand, if you have an oversupply of those, the price is going to come back down. So I'm interested to see over the course of the next several years how that plays out, and how that changes and maybe adjusts. But I just hope that we don't position the argument, and I really appreciate what you said earlier, in terms of what's good and what's bad.
Yeah.
I think that we have to acknowledge, one, the position of where coffee producers are historically in terms of being price takers and very often subject to controls that are way outside of, or factors that are way outside of their control. And the moment that they start pursuing these other means to aggregate value, now we want to throw shade on it and say it's bad. I really want to be cautious about that. What do you do as a producer if you can't access these, world-renowned varieties that are grown around the world, or your environment isn't conducive to growing those? Well, how do you pursue creating more value in the products that you're producing? I think it's a legitimate question. Like I've talked with many producers around the world. I can't buy geisha seeds. I can't buy fill in the blank seeds. I can't buy these coffees that are producing some of the highest value coffees in the world. So does that mean I'm just screwed and I'm now left to just taking whatever price the commodity market? That doesn't seem right either.
Yeah.
So I get off on a tangent, but I think that the pricing discussion, I think over the next several years we'll see some stabilization of that. I think we'll see an increase in supply, more people trying to offer those coffees in the market. And, I've seen consumers who have been drawn into coffee through maybe those types of fermentation methods or flavor profiles, and they've expanded from that and been exposed to other coffees from other countries. So like as an entry point for consumers, maybe there's some good things we can utilize with that, and introducing people to what coffee can be and to the possibilities that are out there. It's a very long answer, I know, to your short question. But I do think that we will see in the marketplace some change because of more and more people doing that. Can I just really hope we can keep the conversation away from the one is bad, one is good, one is pure, one is impure, and just have a conversation about it from a very neutral position that really tries to understand the background and the why producers are pursuing that.
100%. I agree with that we just need to accept the diversity. As diversity of people, diversity of coffee. As simple as that. This just exists.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a great point.
Yeah. Oh, that was a very nice conversation. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
So enjoy the world of coffee, and thank you for this insights.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.